trained to be a primary school teacher. So, I mean, clearly I would have been a mature teacher. And I signed up for a course, a local course. The name of the generic course is SCITT. So it's School-Centred Initial Teacher Training. So it's a combination of sort of lectures and then times when you spend at school. So it's quite common nowadays that you do it that way rather than spending a couple of years in universities, which is what people previously used to do. So I've always thought about being a teacher. And I sort of got to the stage in my career where it was a possibility. So I did some work experience with a local school, thoroughly enjoyed it, and decided to give it a go as a bit of a career change, really. So we started last September. There was about 55 people on the course. About 90% were women and about 10% chaps. I wasn't the oldest person, but I was obviously one of the older persons. So that's probably about half the people were in their 20s, and then it sort of went up to sort of early 50s. And as I say, it was mixed. So we'd have perhaps a week or two of lectures where we'd have somebody to come in to talk to us about maths or English and things like that. Then we'd go and do a sort of a 4-week block at a school and get some hands-on experience and gradually build up our teaching skills. So the idea was at the end of a sort of a 9-month course, it sort of mirrored the school. We would be trained teachers, which was a bit scary because obviously 9 months doesn't seem very long to become a teacher. And it all started out very well. It was very enjoyable. The people on the course were great. And I'm obviously a bit older than most people on the course, really. And there was a few things that sort of started to grate on me. And it came to a head. We'll perhaps come back to the other bits, but it came to a head about halfway through the course when we had a day put aside for diversity, equity, and inclusion. So it was an entire day. And I mean, even before we went on the course, it was sort of clear to me that it seemed to be very out of proportion to what we were actually doing. And there's a very easy sort of explanation of that. We'd spent only one day had been put aside to learn phonics. So phonics is the system where children learn how to read, and basically, so appa, all the sort of sounds. And, it's actually a very good way of learning to read. It's a vital way of doing it. And we only had one session that lasted a day on that. So you can see sort of where the priorities lay for this sort of thing. So anyway, I think, lots of sort of raised eyebrows before we went to the Diversity Inclusion Day. And it was pretty much what I expected. We had a transgender activist running it. We were looking at all the protected characteristics that are there. I think there's either 9 or 11. So age, disability, transgenderism, sexuality were basically the ones, or the only ones that they were interested in talking to us about. And it felt very much like an indoctrination session.
What were the only two they were interested in talking about? Sorry to interrupt.
Sorry, yeah. So the main ones were sort of sexuality and transgenderism as protected characteristics. I mean, the lecturer was actually he was quite young, but he was an ex-teacher, and he'd sort of made his career out of going around lecturing on these sorts of things. So he was it was all about his personal story, which made it quite difficult to raise any objections because you sort of felt that you were attacking him. But anyway, I was very well behaved. I just sat there, as I think most other people did, and listened to it for the entire day. But it very much felt like an indoctrination session. This is what transgenderism is. This is why it's important. These are the feelings that you need to be aware of. We could perhaps go into a few more things in a bit more detail, but we got through the day. I got through the day, in my head, I was thinking all sorts of things, but I didn't say anything because I knew I had to get through it. And I suspect most of my fellow students felt pretty much the same. And we were walking back to our cars after the session. There was probably 3 or 4 other students with me. And, we were just talking about the course, and I made a throwaway comment, what I thought was a throwaway comment, to the effect of, wasn't today a load of nonsense? Or wasn't this transgender stuff a load of nonsense? And, lots of agreements, and absolutely, and at least we don't have to do it again, sort of comments. I think that was on the Friday. So this was January of this year, I think, if I'm right. Anyway, so I go home, back for the weekend. On the Monday, I'm in school because I was starting a placement there. I get an email from one of the course directors asking for me to go in for an interview or to go and see both of the course directors the following day. Which was a little bit odd. So I went in and somebody had made a complaint, basically. Somebody had made the complaint that I'd said that this transgender business was a load of nonsense. And they were treating it extremely seriously. And it wasn't a public comment, but that didn't seem to matter. Maybe it shouldn't matter really whether it's public or not. But so we had a very while they were sort of, again, it was a sort of inquisitorial type of approach. The general thrust of it was this was not an acceptable thing to say or view to have about this for somebody who wanted to be a teacher. There was, although I explained that actually part of it came from my views that I didn't agree with it. When I say what I'm talking about was the context of perhaps having a child that tells you that they're actually of the opposite sex and want you to treat them as the opposite sex. And I said, well, I'm not prepared to do that. I wouldn't disrespect the child. I wouldn't be horrible to the child, but I wouldn't go along with what I would see as their fantasies. But anyway, that sort of view is completely unacceptable as a teacher. They wanted me to perhaps speak to I'm Catholic. They wanted me to speak to perhaps a Catholic head teacher to see how they might deal with that. The nub of it was that if I continued with these views without recanting these views, I wouldn't be allowed to pass the course. So I was about halfway through, but I still obviously had a reasonable amount of time to go. And you have to pass what's called a professional standards set of criteria. So they have to tick you off on all these criteria, and that is one of their professional standards that I guess they'd say you have to respect everybody's beliefs. So it's basically you will recant these views or you won't pass. They didn't threaten to kick me off the course. It's same sort of result, I suppose. So I said, look, I'm not prepared to recant my views and give you some sort of declaration that I wouldn't treat a child like, well, I wouldn't declare that I would agree that the child is whatever gender they tell me they are, because it has wider implications, obviously, with the other children. So I said, well, look, I need to think about it. I may want to pull off the course. So they said, fine. And this was the thing that I think annoyed me the most, actually, of everything, because the following day I was due to go back to the school. I was assisting the teacher. I wasn't teaching yet. I'd teach occasional lessons, but I wasn't the teacher. And they said, well, okay, but we're going to have to speak to the headmaster because you're potentially, or he may view you as a safeguarding risk now based on what the discussions that we've actually had. Which is like, oh, okay, that's ridiculous. But so look, I will save you the bother. I will call in sick tomorrow, make my decision, and then let you know. So I did that. I made my decision, and I decided that there was no point with me carrying on the course. I didn't want to live or work in an environment where I couldn't say what I thought was actually true. So I handed my notice in, and that's more or less the end of it, I suppose. Sorry, that's probably longer than 5 minutes.
Thank you. No, that's okay. Thank you, James. That's helpful to get background to that. What we'd like to do to begin with is just to get more background details, and you have already given us a few references, but we just wanted to establish more of a coherent picture of the background facts, if we could. So you said you started the course in August of 2022, and it was for 9 months.
Yeah, it would have finished in June 23, so it would mirror the school year. Yeah.
In June, okay. Was this part-time or full-time, this course?
It was full-time, yeah.
And how many days a week? Are we talking 5 days?
Yeah, actually, sorry, it probably finished in July, thinking about it. But yeah, no, it was 5 days a week. So the typical structure was you'd have 1 week in the centre where they'd lecture you, a day on English, a day on maths, and then you might have 4 weeks at a school that you'd been allocated to. But yeah, the only time you had off was school holidays and weekends. So it was full time.
So if it's from August 2022 to July, that's more than 9 months. It's could be 11 months maybe?
Yeah, I suppose I say 9 months in the sense that it's a school year. So you obviously have the summer holiday. It's probably 9 months of actual work, I guess.
Yes, so it's the holiday bit that
yeah.
extends it, I understand. Were the course fees government funded?
Yeah, so it was pretty much like a degree course in the sense it was £9,250. So yes, you have to apply to do that via the government, and they pay your fees, yeah. Of which you pay back. Obviously, it's a loan in that sense.
Right, and in the circumstances, given that you didn't go through the entire course, what was the expectation about you paying back the fees?
So I think they paid the student finance company had paid the first term, which was about 3,000, and I think about 2,000 of that was actually refunded. So I think I probably still owe about £1,000 for the course, something like that. So I didn't have to pay for the rest of it.
Right. And did you, in terms of general living costs, did you take out any loans during that period?
No, I was living at home.
And this course, was it aimed at preparing you for teaching in primary or secondary schools, or both?
It was primary, yeah. So the provider does courses for both. Plus, it's quite different skills needed. So this was a primary course, yeah.
Right. And you say that in your consent form that you pulled out of the course having got through about 45% of it. So just generally, what month would that have been that you actually departed from the course?
I think it was January. It was 45. I think I probably worked that out in terms of content that I'd actually done. So it wasn't quite half, but it wasn't far off half. So it's a while since I did the calculation, but I did think about that when I did it. Yeah.
Okay. Now, for 6 months prior to commencing your teacher training course, you served as a volunteer at a Catholic primary school.
Yes.
And just quoting from your case summary, you say you did this to get a feel for teaching, to both see if I liked it and whether I was suitable. Can you give us a picture of what happened during this 6-month period, mainly in terms of your sense of job satisfaction?
Yeah. So it was quite different. So I was doing 2 mornings a week there. So I used to do Tuesday and Wednesday mornings. I guess I was really more of a teaching assistant. So I would come in, help the children. I used to do some reading with the children. I used to, help them with their maths that they got stuck on. I was sort of a person that would hover around the class and assist the children, chivvy the ones that were sort of staring into the distance. So I wasn't really teaching. It was more, I guess, to get experience of sort of the school environment. But no, it was brilliant. I really enjoyed it. I mean, children are great people to work with. You get a lot of feedback from children. The sort of when you see the sort of puzzled face and they're stuck on something, and you can sort of help them, and then you see the sort of, I've got it sort of face. There's a tremendous sense of it's just a great feeling to have been able to help them like that. So it was great. I went on a few school trips with them. I built up quite a very good relationship with, certainly with some of them in the class. So I liked being in the school environment. I think being in a Catholic school perhaps gave me wasn't your run-of-the-mill school, as it were. So I got a slightly better view of teaching than perhaps the broader sense of teaching there.
Thank you. The head teacher at the school encouraged you to apply for the teacher training course, I understand.
Yeah.
From what you have told us, I also understand that you had, prior to this encouragement, already you had felt a strong vocation with regards to teaching for the last few years. Do we have that right?
Yeah, I mean,
can you just say something about that sense of vocation that you had?
Yeah, so I'm probably not one of these people that when I was sort of 21, I always wanted to be a teacher. It's something that I think has crept up on me later in life. I've had don't necessarily want to go into it now, but I've had quite a successful career in other areas, and I've got a nice house and all that sort of stuff. So I felt I'd done well for myself and my family, and now I wanted to do something that genuinely I saw as a vocation. I could actually help somebody else. I don't think anybody goes into teaching for the money, and it's the hours although you get nice holidays, the actual hours on a day-to-day basis are very long, and teachers I don't think are particularly valued. But when you get that interaction with children, and you can change lives or help them, it was just a very sort of powerful draw to me, and it sort of tied in with my Christian faith, and I had sort of planned on working at Catholic schools. I mean, I'd even got some sort of vision, probably would never have worked, of sort of starting my own school or something like that. So it was very much how I saw sort of the future sort of working, and I felt called to do it. Having spent a lot of time in schools and with teachers, I've got a much greater respect for them. They do get a lot of bad press, really, but it is a difficult job, made so much harder by government regulation and red tape and all the stuff, the diversity stuff that's thrown on top of them, and they find it hard to teach. They don't have time to sit down and teach because they're too busy filling in forms or meeting criteria, really. But notwithstanding all of that, it still is, I think, a great vocation, as something that I had wanted to be part of.
Yes. In your introduction, you gave us a few reference points about what the course involved. Could you just give us just a little bit more detail, a summary, but with more detail as to what this teacher training course actually covered and what its components were?
So, I mean, primary teaching is different to secondary teaching, because typically as a secondary teacher, you're, let's say, a maths teacher. So you learn, you need to be an expert in maths, and you need some teaching skills. As a primary school teacher, you will be teaching 10 plus subjects. So you need to have an awareness or a good grounding in all of those subjects. So there's a lot of subject content for maths and English, clearly, but history, handwriting to some degree, and phonics and RE and sport and things like that. So there's a lot of the sessions that we did was trying to impart subject knowledge to us as well. So and maths was probably quite interesting, because there was a massive disparity in terms of the knowledge that actually a lot of my fellow students had in terms of teaching maths. Some were very strong, and some were not so strong. So they were basically trying to bring everybody up to a decent level. And then you have the sort of theoretical side, so theories of learning, theories of teaching. How do this? I suppose this was something that was very new to me. How do people learn? How do you actually teach things? Because it's all very well knowing your subject, but just knowing your subject and being in the same room as 30 children doesn't guarantee that they will take it off you or they will learn it. So there's different sort of methodologies. So, for example, there was modelling is a good tool. So modelling is basically the idea of showing people what you're doing. So let's say you're doing a multiplication sum. So you would do lots of examples on the board. You will have sort of tangible things that you can look at, counters and beans and things that you can move around to enable children to get the maths in their head, as it were. And a lot of that was very good, actually. I think a lot of that, especially in maths, had come on a long way from the past. I think as a country, we teach maths very well. I think we train maths particularly well. Some of the other subjects, not so much really, but yeah, that's basically how it works.
Thank you. You've told us that there were about 5 men on the course out of a total of 55 people.
Yeah.
What else did you observe about the student demographics? I'm thinking, well, I won't give you any prompts yet. I'll leave it to you. Any other characteristics about the kinds of students that attended this course that might come to your mind?
So yes, there's definitely a sort of male-female divide, and funnily enough, just on that point, of those 5, what I know, one of the other ones left. I know one of the other chaps was held back a year, and obviously I left as well. So I think the number of guys that qualified was probably 2 or 3. So in terms of ages, I'd say about half of them were straight out of university. So about 21, 22, something like that. And then the rest were a mixture of mid-20s to late 30s. Quite a lot of them, actually, let's stick with that point first. So a lot of them didn't have a huge amount of worldly experience and had gone straight into it. They, whether that or not, that's a good thing, really. But you certainly saw. So there was a lady, for example, who had actually been in the military. I think she'd been an intelligence officer, and she was brilliant, and she would have made a brilliant teacher. So she was very organised. She knew what she wanted to do. So in other words, she had that experience that I think enabled her to grasp the subject matter better. Whereas I think people who'd come straight out of university found it harder, because they're not typically used to dealing with children. And the theory is fine. You can stand up and I can stand up and give a lecture to you 4, and you'll be very well behaved. But when you've got 30 children, half of whom are not very well behaved, it's difficult, and there are different skills that you certainly learn them more perhaps when you've been a parent, and so you could probably tell the teachers that were parents. So other points to make, I think. Sorry. I think a lot of the people that went into it. I'm stumbling a little bit because I don't want to be rude about my fellow students, because they were, to a person, all very lovely students. I think probably they would agree that we basically weren't the 55 most academically gifted people in the world, and that's fine, but that didn't seem to be too important. It was, again, we'll come on to it, but adherence to the ideology was obviously much more important than being very good at maths, for example. I think they liked the younger students more because they weren't so questioning. So when we did have difficult topics, it would tend to be sort of 3 or 4 of us, sort of the older ones, who would say, I'm not sure about that, for example, or is that right? Or they would question it. So it seemed to me that they see it as a sort of passing on of a way of doing things. It wasn't free thinking. They didn't encourage free thought. And the older ones, I think we did struggle a little bit with that. So yeah, I'm sorry, I can't really think of anything other demographically. I don't know if you've got any specific.
Well, just one question. I mean, were there any indicators presented to you that gave you any reason to think that there were students of any particular religion, for example, or people who were very clearly of no belief? Anything in that particular category?
There was certainly a number of ladies who were Muslim. They would wear the headscarf. So maybe 7 or 8, something like that. I would probably say that pretty much nobody else had any religious views at all. 1 or 2.
But how about course staff? Were there any indicators as to their religion or lack thereof?
Not really, no. One thing I will say is that there was one day where there was a holy day of obligation for me, and I had to go to mass. So I just said, I might be a little bit late back for lunch, and they were very accommodating and said, look, if you're a bit late, don't worry about it. So where it didn't really affect anything that they were doing, they were happy to accommodate us, but they didn't express any religious views that I was aware of. No.
Okay, that's good. We're going to go into the section dealing with the actual content of the course in more detail. Before we do that, are there any other questions from either Paul or Simon about this background?
May come up later. You mentioned there were some Muslim students. I mean, they were happy to go along with this sort of direction.
I mean, they were all pretty much very young girls, in the sense that they very much kept themselves to themselves. They would talk to you and be pleasant, but they didn't necessarily mix hugely with the rest of the group. So I didn't have a huge amount of interaction with them. My guess would be that they just thought, like I did, some of this is just nonsense, and kept their heads down, which is maybe what I should have done. But I didn't hear any views from them, no.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. Thank you.
I'm going to, in a moment, invite Simon to proceed with the next lot of questions. Before that, I just want to say a word about, in your case summary, you say that there were some good points, I'm quoting you here, some good points about the course. For example, with regards to the teaching of maths, it was very heavily influenced by modern progressive ideology, you say. Now, for the purposes of this hearing, James, we won't be focusing on the examples that you've provided in your case summary about progressive ideology, examples which you say illustrate this modern progressive ideology, because, as I say, this will exceed the remit of our inquiry. But I should say that the illustrations that you provide may potentially be considered as background later down the line when we do our subsequent, when we do our analysis of your case in terms of the overall course ethos that you believe you witnessed. So that may come, as I say, down into our analysis further down the line. But at this point, we won't be really focusing on those other examples.
Okay.
So yes, Simon, if I can invite you to continue, please, with questions.
Thank you. Good morning, James. In your case summary, you give us an overview of the books that you say were discussed during an English session, which I quote, have been picked to promote a specific progressive ideology. You go on to say books such as Robinson Crusoe were nowhere to be seen, whereas books such as My Two Dads and such like were the books to be promoted. Would you like to elaborate on this?
Yeah, so we as part of English, there's different sections to it. So what they call oracy and reading skills and lots of it. So each day we would have some different specialists come in and talk to us. And quite often, I mean, the aim of what they were doing was really to give us tools to teach. So things and items that we would sort of take back and use when we were teaching. And one of those was the sort of books that they used and they thought would be helpful for us. And I suppose the thing that struck me was the criteria that I think they probably use when picking books. So, when I pick books to read and did for my children and for myself, is it an interesting story? Is it a very well written story? But that's not, I never had this specific conversation with them, but it was clear that that wasn't the sort of criteria that they were using. The criteria was very much, what is the message that we want to get across? Does this book have a social, can it advance a social purpose? Can it give a message? Can it show children a particular way of thinking about things? And it was, it was sort of book after book, they were like this, that I didn't see, certainly on the training course, less so at the school, but it was very much, we've got to have a book about two dads. We've got to have a book about, a gay penguin and all that sort of stuff. And there just didn't seem to be any sort of mix at all. And it seemed to be very clear what they were aiming at.
Thank you. And you also tell us that you avoid to use phrases such as boys and girls because they're exclusionary. Was this instruction given on just one occasion, or was this repeated more than that?
It was certainly more than once. I mean, I'm not saying we had it in every lesson, but I mean, I think so. When we were at school, we were basically visited by our assessors, or somebody would come in and just sort of watch us giving a sort of lesson to see how we were getting on. And as I recall, I think the comment might have been made specifically to me. It's a general thing as a teacher to say, quiet down, boys and girls, or stand up, boys and girls, or something like that. So yes, the comment was made, I think, to me specifically that it's not something we ought to do. And then I do remember, again, specifically on a training day, a teacher saying, a trainer rather, saying we should avoid using phrases like that because you might have bisexual or gender fluid children in your class. And bear in mind, obviously, that the eldest children we could possibly be teaching would be 11 years old. we wouldn't teach anybody any older than that. But yeah, it was something that they were wanting to get across.
Okay, so besides yourself being corrected, what did you see any other young teachers pulled up about this? Did you witness any people being forced to teach this particular?
Not specifically, because say when we were in the session, the training sessions, we were together, and then we would go back to our respective schools, and then when we were reviewed and monitored at schools, somebody would come into your lesson, so nobody else would be there other than you and them. So I didn't specifically see that, no.
Okay, so instead of using boy and girl, what words would they have you used, or what were they recommending?
I guess just children, really.
Right. Okay. Did you feel like you had to self-censor in terms of not ever saying boys or girls?
I didn't, no, because I just think I'm too old for that nonsense, to coin a phrase. But I mean, certainly most people on the course will have been careful about what they said. And they were, I mean, a lot of them, let's say, had gone through university fairly recently. I think they were very much, they knew the things that you could say and the things that you shouldn't say, and it sort of builds it into you. So I think they sort of soaked into their sort of body in the same way that it hadn't for me.
So how did all this stuff make you feel? I mean, you seem to brush it off quite easily. I mean, did you laugh at it, or did it make you feel angry? What was going through your mind at the time when all this was going on?
Well, before I started, my wife had actually said, sort of predicted this sort of thing might happen. So to be honest, I didn't really believe her. I didn't think that people were that daft. And initially, yes, I think I probably did laugh it off. And I'm now looking back at it in hindsight and being more relaxed about it. But initially, the first sort of time, it's like, that's a bit odd. Not happy about that. But it was very much a drip. And there was lots of comments about, it's not a sort of Christian point really, but pale males and pale stale males and all this sort of thing again and again and again. And it's very, I mean, one of the major issues in primary school teaching is the lack of men. Not because men are better teachers, it's because they bring something else to being a teacher and can offer male role models and all that sort of stuff. And certainly that sort of approach does not encourage men into teaching. It's pushing them out of teaching, or at the very least pushing them into secondary teaching. Did
you ever pull any of these people on who used pale, male and stale on the grounds that it was sexist, ageist and racist?
I did on a few occasions. So there was one slightly different point really, but we had a music teacher talking to us about music, and she was very good in the way that we, getting children to use like books and pens as drums and things like that. But she sort of came out at the start of her lesson about how we must decolonize the music curriculum. So I was like sighing inside. I thought, okay, I'll have to say something. I said, what do you mean we must decolonize the music curriculum? So then it was into, well, of course, it's been dominated by men for decades. And we need to get more rap into it and less sort of classical music. And again, we had science lessons where we were talking about scientists. So they had lots of sort of inspirational posters on this wall. It was a classroom we were being taught in. And you look at them and you think, well, there's no men there at all. A lot of the women aren't even white. And it's very, again, it would be very disheartening, and it all ties together. It feels like you're being sort of done down. And when I did say, I think I put it in my notes actually, I said, well, because I think the point was, are there any disabled scientists that we could use as role models? So I said, Stephen Hawking's, but that was just shoved aside. They weren't interested in Stephen Hawking. So yes.
Well, why weren't they interested in Stephen Hawking? Because in your view?
I think it was because he was a white man. If it had been an African lady who was disabled in any way, I think you wouldn't have been able to move for posters of that person around the school. But he wasn't of interest to they weren't interested in him.
Okay, so what's your feeling about this ideology that you've experienced?
I feel that, I mean, in terms of intensity, it is much greater in the training environment than when you actually get into school, because I mean, a lot of the teachers are older and perhaps haven't gone through it to the same degree. But it very much feels like that there is an aim in mind, which is strange because as far as I know, the provider of the training course, I mean, they're not a government provider. I think they're an independent course, regulated obviously by the civil service, but it very much felt like it had been designed to churn out a particular sort of individual and clearly weed out certain individuals who didn't sort of fit into that sort of mindset. And again, I mentioned it before already, but it struck me hugely that we would spend as much time on diversity, equity, and inclusion as we would on phonics. When we found out that we only had one day on phonics, there was a little bit of an uproar, because certainly if you're teaching in years sort of 1 and 2 and foundation, you spend half the day teaching phonics. So it's absolutely vital to have a good grounding of it. And it's hard. It's hard. It's not something you can just pick up generically. You need to know it. And it wasn't seen, or it was put on a par with treating people with their pronouns correctly.
Gosh. So how do you express your feelings and thoughts to other students?
Well, how did I now, or how did I at the time? Do you mean?
How did you at the time?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I was quite upfront with them in terms of that I thought a lot of this was nonsense. I would be the person who would ask the question, you know, the sort of put my hand up about Stephen Hawkins, asking about decolonization. Again, the pale male stale things, I at least once said, well, I'm not sure that's really appropriate. So I did sort of sadly get a bit of a reputation of being the sort of awkward person. But actually, well, I might have had that reputation among the teachers, but I had a very good relationship, I think, with all of my fellow students. I got on with them very well, despite, you know, being older than most of them. And I think I was, so they didn't dislike me because I was being a little bit awkward on these sorts of questions. I think some of them thought, you know, at least James is asking those questions, or, you know, saying those things that I'm thinking.
So what sorts of things did they say to you? In this respect, with regard
yeah. So I remember when we had the Diversity, Equity and Inclusion Day, before it started, there was, I think, at least 2 or 3 people came up to me today and, you know, saying things like, oh, this is going to be, you're going to like this day, James. This is just your sort of day, knowing the sort of what I had, these sort of views on it. So I think they were probably quietly supportive. When I'd had sort of little conversations about it, you know, nobody pulled me up on it. They were perhaps a little bit reluctant to talk about it. I don't think I had anybody said to me, you know, you say it how it is, James, we're 100% behind you. I think they were genuinely scared, stroke indoctrinated about saying these things. But my feeling was I didn't actually speak to anybody that I thought disagreed with my approach.
Yeah, thank you. You have told us that a student colleague of yours asked one of your tutors, who you say was a primary school teacher, at what age was it appropriate to talk to children about LGBT issues? What exactly was said?
Well, I wasn't there on that day. I was actually ill on that day, but that was a conversation I had with him. But yeah, so I think he'd been talking about books again. I think he'd brought some books into them. And I think that was the question. So a friend of mine, well, he asked the question, when should we start talking to children about these sort of things? And the answer was almost straight away. There didn't, yeah. I mean, I didn't actually, I wasn't in on that conversation, so I would be surmising. But really, the idea, I think, was that this is a very important part of teaching.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
James, can you tell us a little bit more about this advice that you all received about not using the words boy or girl? Do you remember any reactions, perhaps during informal moments, from the other students? Did this question come up about, well, we mustn't mention the word boy or girl? Did it ever come up in any conversation outside of the actual classes?
Do you know, I'm not sure it did really. I mean, I was surprised. I think a lot of I think I was quite naive, really, coming into teaching from a slightly different environment. I hadn't spent years at university going through these things. It may well have been that a lot of my fellow students thought that that was a perfectly normal approach to take. They'd spent 3 years at university getting told these sort of things. There certainly wasn't a groundswell of outrage about it. Not that I think people agreed with it. I think it was just a case of, well, it's just another one of these sort of rules that are being imposed on us.
Yes. Can you tell us as well, was anything mentioned about the role of the law with reference to teaching LGBT in primary schools? Because it's something of a grey area in the guidance, and there are differing opinions as to how such teaching should be applied within the primary school setting. So do you remember any references to what the law actually stipulates with regards to this area?
Well, we weren't, with the one exception, we didn't really talk about the law in that area. We were certainly not told that there was any controversy or different opinions, or that, some schools might have different views on what ought to be taught, or parents might have different views. It was very much, this is the approach that you need to take. We weren't really to give any weight to the opinions of parents necessarily. It's that this is the things that children need to know. When we had our diversity, equity and inclusion day, there was a reasonable bit of sort of legal stuff there. So the lecturer talked about, I think, the Equalities Act. I can't remember the names of the acts now, but it was the act that introduced the protected characteristics. So we spent a bit of time going through all the different protected characteristics. And again, this chap was clearly an activist. He'd written books on the subject. We weren't presented as in a neutral way. There was no two sides to it at all, really. There was no question of, well, there's a debate, as you say, Robert, as to what should be taught. It was, this is it. It was portrayed as these are the equal characteristics that all must be protected. But of course, when I ultimately pushed back, I found my characteristic of being a Christian was not as equal as other characteristics. But yeah, I don't think they wanted us to know the law particularly. I think they just wanted us to do it.
When you say a moment ago, this chap was an activist, was this the same individual that you refer to elsewhere, who was a transgender individual?
Yeah.
Same person.
Yeah. So he was an ex-teacher who, he was probably only about 25, so he had maybe 28. He hadn't been a teacher for very long. He'd obviously found his career in lecturing other teachers and schools. And as far as I could tell from what he said, he travelled the country doing this sort of thing all the time. He'd written books. He had a very firm view on what we should think about things. So, for example, he gave us this task. We had to go back into our groups and decide what being transgender meant. And so, the correct answer was it was a person who had been born into the wrong body. It did occur to me afterwards, I might have said something along the lines of, it's somebody who's deluded and thinks they're of a different sex to the sex they actually are. I didn't say that. Again, I was sort of trying to keep my head down there. I can only imagine what would have happened had I actually mentioned that to him.
Was this individual... Oh, sorry, carry on.
No, sorry, you go, Rob.
Was this individual, in terms of either a perception that you had or facts that you know were absolutely true, was this individual a biological male? Oh, yeah,
he had a beard. He had a similar beard that I've got now, dressed very effeminately. Is this a statement of fact that this person was a biological male, or did the person just appear to be? No, he gave us his life story, basically. So the session was built to a large degree around his experiences and how when he was a child and how he hadn't felt right and all that sort of stuff. So it was very sort of emotional, which partly made it. I didn't go to that with the intention of being difficult, but had you wanted to sort of raise any objections to that sort of thing, it's harder because you can object to something theoretically, but if somebody's giving you their life experience, you then feel like you're attacking them, which makes it more difficult. So very, very sort of emotional. Actually, sorry,
did he dress in?
Yeah. How did he dress? I think he probably had like what you might call a sort of a lady's trouser suit on, quite sort of flowy, a lot of makeup. There was no doubt that he was actually a man. He sounded like a man, but there was no doubt that he was dressing how he thought a woman would actually dress. Yeah, I mean, I don't think that's any disrespect.
But with a beard, that's rather provocative, isn't it?
Yeah, well, yeah. So it reminds me a little bit of that guy who won the Eurovision Song Contest a few years ago, the Austrian chap. So it was very much a look at me sort of approach, not subtle or sort of downplaying it. It was very.
Could you actually imagine a woman dressing in the clothes that he chose, or was it an exaggeration of like a parody of?
It was perhaps a slight exaggeration.
Yeah.
In that a lot of our lecturers came very much dressed down. You know, I'm not saying they came in jeans, but that they wouldn't dress in a way that you might. So it wasn't, for want of a better word, it wasn't a tarty sort of approach, but it was certainly a lot of consideration to be put into it. It was something you might hit the town on, if you like, quite flowy and colourful.
And did this provider teach train students in how to deliver RSHE?
He was just talking to us as trainee teachers on the issues around protected characteristics and about diversity and about inclusion and how we should sort of incorporate into our teaching practices. So he wasn't particularly talking about specific subjects that we might be teaching. It was about everything that we need to know, if you like, about quality and inclusion, you know, how we could include people. There was a lot of, so he brought up the, I can't think of the word now, but so, for example, he would give examples of discrimination that had been suffered in the past. So he would say most primary school teachers were women, but most or the majority of primary school head teachers and deputy heads were men. So he'd say, well, that's evidence of discrimination. So I actually did put my hand up at that point. I said, well, it might be evidence of discrimination. It might just be that actually, you know, women have got other responsibilities and other duties and actually don't feel able to take on the additional time that being a head teacher costs. And basically being a head teacher really takes over your entire life. So there are other factors that may actually be the result of, so in other words, correlation is not necessarily causation. And he sort of agreed with me, but again, it was his approach was very sort of superficial, in very sort of simplistic. You know, if there are not 50% or sort of 90% female head teachers in primary schools, clearly there must be some sort of discrimination. Yeah, funny enough, he came over to me afterwards and said that was a good point, which I thought was funny. I said, no, that's fine. I said, to be honest, I don't really go in for all this sort of stuff. And he said to me, well, that sort of took him aback, I think. And he said to me, well, it is a legal requirement of the course. So I said, oh, all right, okay then. So that was the only interaction I had with him directly. You know, he was a nice enough guy, but, and I do find, and I don't know if this is getting slightly off topic, but well, I won't name them, a relative of mine, their children go to a school and they had somebody to come in to talk to them about smoking or not smoking. And that was a transgender person that was brought in to talk to their children who were, I think, 8 or 9 at the time. And the mother was not told about it. So, you know, again, it is quite prevalent and parents are not told. You know, if you were bringing a fireman in to talk to your children, you'd be telling everybody and, you know, dress them up as firemen and things like that. But there is a degree of secrecy as well, I think, about these things.
Hello?
Yeah, sorry, I finished.
Sorry, I thought we missed each other there. So before we go to the next section, are there any other questions from anybody, Paul or Simon, with regards to these issues before we, as I say, move on? No. Okay, so I'd like to invite Paul to proceed with the next area. Thank you.
Just say, Simon, did you have something to say, Simon?
No, I haven't got anything.
Okay, just like you look. Sorry. Okay, fine. Okay. James, I'm going to sound very simple, but I've just got to get my head around this. I'm going to talk now about the Diversity, Equality and Inclusion Day. But now, you initially said this seemed very disproportionate because you only had a day on phonetics, etc. I mean, I think everyone would agree phonetics sounds ridiculous in a day. I mean, but the phonetics course, that was what? At the college, lecture new and techniques. Is that correct?
We're talking through how the phonics system works. I mean, it was only really an overview of, perhaps how you pronounce the 12 letters and how different letters go towards making different sounds. So,
but that was in the college as a part of a course. You weren't at the school or anything like that.
Correct. Yeah.
And this diversity day, was that in the college or was that at a school?
No, again, it was a different building, but it wasn't a school environment. It was so that we had lots of different places that we had to have these different lectures. But yeah, it was only the students on the course that were present. It was very much a sort of theory college day. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And this was sort of sold. Well, look, every school's got this diversity days or parades or whatever they've got, and you've got to understand it. Was that the purpose of the training?
Yeah, I mean, it was probably a bit deeper than that. It was really about firstly, to understand all of these issues. So if you come across an issue where you have a transgender child, to understand what you're supposed to do about it, what it is, what the sort of legal bits around it, and really, it was certainly sold as an important part of the course. It's how we would approach these sort of issues, and so it was. I mean, we weren't so much talking about the practical. There will be a Pride Day once a year and all that sort of stuff. We didn't sort of get into that yet.
So it's really a general course on diversity and inclusion that you had to learn these themes generally.
Yeah.
And I mean, let me be provocative, but we're trying to get to sort of understand where you are. Was this the only single occasion you had this type of teaching?
It was the only occasion where the whole day, if you like, or a session was dedicated to it. But as I've said, it was infused in other lessons. So we did have lots of talk about pale males. We did have talk about decolonization and all of that sort of stuff. So it was definitely a thread that ran through everything. And I guess probably the course providers, I mean, they spent a lot of time planning these things. So I'd imagine they sort of saw this as sort of the bringing all those threads together for us.
Right. And when I'm asked, I'm just sort of trying to sort of think about this. I think I'll just deal with this more generally, but just let me make my little progress. When I asked you about the Muslim students, you said, well, they probably all kept their heads down. Did that not occur to you, sort of, this is ideological, what the end result is. I'm awkward squad, and I'm now moving to double awkward squad. I'm just putting that thought into,
Yeah. Why didn't I keep my head down?
Yeah.
They say, yeah. I mean, I did try for quite a long time to do it, and I suppose I probably thought I was keeping my head down as much as I could and needed to. I mean, I sat through the whole diversity and equity inclusion day. Other than that query that I mentioned to you, I didn't say anything. I mean, there was so much really nonsense talk that I could have talked about. The thing that actually did it for me, that got me ultimately removed, was just a private comment that I said to some fellow students, obviously one of which who disagreed with me and thought they were doing the right thing. And I don't blame them.
I do.
Pointed, but yeah, I mean, I think they've been brainwashed more than anybody else, really. But
yeah, so just let me pursue that a bit. So, I mean, there are going to be a lot of people on this course, as you say, think like you think. And they've probably made up their mind. They're going to dance around it a bit. They're not going to challenge it. They're going to let the trans activists do their little bit at school and they'll ignore it. Did that not occur to you? I'm just trying to sort of pursue it. I mean,
yeah, no, I'm saying,
yeah.
I think you excuse me. I think you can only take that so far, and it does come to a point where you can't ignore it. I mean, when you're looking at choosing books for your class to read, or the books that you will read to your children, you've got to make an actual choice there. If there is a Pride Day at school, you've got to make a choice there. If there is a transgender child coming in, there is a choice there. So, I appreciated that a lot of this was sort of theoretical. And I think partly in my mind, I was thinking, look, is this the environment that I ultimately want to spend the rest of my career in? I could have avoided it. I think I felt that would be just pushing the matter off. At some point, I would run into an issue that I couldn't hide from. And then when I was called in for my conversation with the course directors, they made it very clear to me that if this sort of was a live case, I would be dismissed almost straight away from the school. There'd be no sort of doing and throwing.
I mean, what actually happened to you? I think it does come across a bit like sort of Stasi East Germany. You're walking to your car, you're with a bunch of fellow students, you give them your private view, which probably most people concur with, and you're snitched on.
Yeah.
And apart from that snitch, you don't have the right private views. You may have passed that course. You might have hoodwinked them and got through it,
That was my plan. And again, I did specifically not say anything during that course, really. So, and there'll be other people that will have got through that course on that basis. The problem is you get into a habit of not saying things. So what's the phrase? Is it Solzhenitsyn, live not by lies? You get into a habit of lying, and then suddenly you sort of forget which is true and which is not true, or what's the difference if you always sort of say that and your children hear you say that. And I didn't want to be in a situation that, where being a teacher, it's a brilliant possibility of sort of molding minds, really, and you want to mold them in the right way, not the wrong way.
I mean, you're almost getting close to saying you can't be a teacher because it's going to come up at some point. You can't go along with this. And it's such an important area, you can't just compartmentalize it. Am I getting...
Yeah, there are some things. So the example I gave when I was called in again, so like the environmental movement, I'm not a big fan of the environmental movement, but, I wouldn't have a problem with being at school and organising recycling days and, looking at videos on saving the whales and things like that, because it doesn't get to the core of a person's being, really. And, there are obviously lots of good things about sort of the environmental movement as well as some not so good things. So, but what you believe about somebody's true identity in terms of whether they're male or female is something that, for me anyway, I just couldn't bring myself to sort of lie about it, which is what I'd be doing. Because obviously, thou shalt not lie, but also the effects on other people of me doing that could be horrendous. So yes, I think it is the stage where you either can't be a teacher or you will have to subsume and push down those beliefs, and you push them down too long, you turn into somebody else.
Yeah. And I mean, so you go to this diversity, equality, inclusion day. Do they say anything like, this is a safe space, let's discuss marriage, or was it, we can have a debate on it? Or was it, I think you've given me the impression, this is just what we say. Yeah. You agree with this and you concur with it, and there's no debate.
I mean, the word safe space was said relatively frequently on that day and on other days, but it was said in the sense, but I don't think anybody then took it to say that they could then make what the course leaders would view as controversial statements. So it was safe in one direction. Nobody, I certainly didn't feel very comfortable about raising particular points. A lot of these lecturers were very, very adamant on their views. So there was one, this is a slightly different point really, but we had a lesson on safeguarding. There's a lot of stuff on safeguarding, and quite rightly. But one of the lecturers got up and said, I believe it is a crime and no parent should ever smack their child or discipline their child. Now, I completely disagree with that. I think the parents are the best people to know how to bring their children up. But I didn't say anything because you could just tell by the way that she was talking that if you did raise any particular point, you know, it would potentially go as a black mark on you.
Yeah.
And there was another time, actually, I think it was the same lecture. We were talking about if a child came to you with an issue. So it was sort of the example, a child is basically making some suggestions that some other adult has been inappropriate with them. And you're supposed to get their permission before telling somebody else. So we were supposed to go back and talk in our group. So this child is coming basically alleging that they've been abused, and you want to go and tell the police or your safeguarding officer, and you're supposed to ask the child, can I do this? Can I share this information? And the scenario was the child said no, you know, because they were scared, basically. So we were supposed to talk about it. The right answer was you can't share that information with anybody until the child gives you permission. The theory was because you would then lose their trust. I just said, well, I think my view is at the end of the day, you know, we've got to protect the child in the here and now. And I think I would have to then report it, whether the child wanted me to or not. So yeah, it's a little bit of a fine line. I can see the arguments on both cases, really. But when I actually stood up and said that, there was definitely a look that I was given that no, James, that is the wrong answer. That is wrong. You know, not a case of, well, I can see how you could argue it, because I was trying to argue it. But no, we're not arguing it, James. That is not the right answer. So then it sort of, that was before the smacking point. So then I didn't really feel like I could actually sort of raise these things, because I thought, well, if I get too many wrong answers, we're all being assessed continuously. It's not going to go well. So there was an environment of course, we can all say what we think, but actually in reality, these are things you can say.
Yeah. And I mean, just to sort of pursue this a bit, I'm going to come to some more questions. I mean, teachers aren't really permitted a conscience as individuals, are they? I mean, in a lot of jobs, there are conscience and healthcare, abortion, there are certain provisions, etc., etc. But teachers aren't allowed any conscience, are they really? I mean, if you were in a school and you had to do something like teach Daddy Johnny has two dads, that's it. You're disobeying an order.
Yeah. No, I think that's true. I hadn't really sort of thought about it like that. But yeah, I mean, nurses are allowed to sort of say, I don't want to participate in abortions, things like that. But no, I mean, I don't think we were ever.
I'm sort of talking as a human right, almost, you know.
Yeah. This, I mean, I guess there are workarounds, and if you've got a good relationship with your head, or you're sick on that day, those sorts of things, really. But it was very. You've got to teach what you're told to teach. It's very highly regulated. So before you would teach a lesson, you have to prepare a plan or a series of plans. You know, as trainees, we have to do that. But even at most schools, you have to do that. Some of them would have to all be signed off by the head. It depends on the type of head that you've actually got. So they know exactly what you're teaching. You know, and obviously they're trying to promote good practice and good standards. And I understand why they do that, really. But yeah, there is a expected way of teaching things. And I think what happens is a lot of schools are scared, or they don't want to teach the controversial subjects like PHSE and puberty and things like that. And what they do is they bring in outside speakers. So this is going back to the school of my sort of relative, where they had this transgender chap talking about smoking. It was the start of a course on puberty and PHSA and all those sort of things. I guess they started off on a sort of an easy topic. But I mean, teachers can talk about that. Teachers are intelligent people, but they'd outsource it to this particular charity. I'm trying to think of the name of it, but and the problem is these charities are not neutral. They have agendas. You can look on their website. I went onto this particular charity's website, And they were very blatant about it. The law says this, but we think actually that includes that we should be teaching about masturbation to primary school children.
Yeah.
And I think parents would be horrified. But so teachers need to be braver, and I think head teachers need to be braver in saying, we are going to teach about this, and we do need to be able to use our conscience. And I think conscience is not just about, clearly, it's not just about ignoring it. It's actually facing these sort of head on and expressing a view.
Can I just ask about your Christian, Catholic faith? I mean, did people know you were a Christian?
Yes.
So everybody knew you were a Christian.
Yeah. So I mean, occasionally, so I tend to say sort of morning and evening prayer, Lauds and Vespers. So if I was in a bit of a hurry in the morning, I might go and say it at break time or something, and occasionally I'd nip off to mass, and just in sort of general conversation, really. So I don't clearly shove it down people's throats, but I'm not ashamed of it either. I like to talk about it.
And I mean, as far as we can tell, there was no accommodation for any religion, Muslim or Christian. It was just, this is what you're going to teach. We don't care what you personally believe as a faith issue.
No, they would accommodate you in terms of having a longer lunch break if necessary.
Yeah.
And I guess they might accommodate you in terms of not having pork for Muslims. Those sort of practical issues they were quite good at dealing with. But yeah, I mean, it wasn't even a question really in terms of, nobody said, James, look, we've got this diversity day. We know you're a Christian. If you need to sit out, or it just wasn't. I don't think anyone thought about it. No.
Okay. And at the event, you actually say it was a wide-ranging, covered matters such as law, including protected characteristics, terminology such as cisgender, intersectionality, but it's all done through the lens of transgenderism. I mean, if I may say this wasn't really about diversity. There are Muslims that believe this, there could be little Catholic children that believe that. This was, well, as you said, it's highly ideological with a predetermined conclusion. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, again, it wasn't a debate, as we've said. It was a case of, this is how it is. If you were I guess a fairly naive sort of 21-year-old straight out of university, and you probably wouldn't know that there were people that had different views, or perhaps thought that there were reasons why, well, there ought to be age limits clearly on anything that somebody learns. There was no question really of when is an appropriate age to teach these things, other than a very, very young age, really. That there was not a question of, if we take about, let me go back and say, at some point a child will find out about the fact of transgenderism, the fact in the sense that there are people out there that will say they're transgender, clearly, and they need some knowledge imparted to them. But when should they know that? I would say that's probably a secondary school issue. And how should that be presented? The way that we would be wanted to present it from the diversity day would be, it is the fact that some men are born in women's bodies and some women are born in men's bodies. That's just how it is. And, we've got to help these people. And clearly they do need help. But there'd be no question that that somebody might have another idea. If you don't know that there are these other ideas, and that's the same for trainees, and of course that's what we're supposed to tell children.
And it seems totally obsessed on sex. I mean, it's all lesbianism, gender, transgenderism, homosexuality, bisexuality. And I'm also exploring this. I mean, it's obsessive about sex, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. So, I mean, there are other protected characteristics such as age and disability. They were brushed over probably in about 5 minutes. I mean, for want of a better word, I think they find this as a sexy topic to talk about. Again, it's their pet project. So we had an entire day, and I'd probably say 80% of it, we were talking about transgender things and approaches and issues, clearly because that's what the chat wanted to talk about.
I mean, I'm pursuing this because, so forgive me, I hope I'm not going off spec, but there seems to be a determination to sexualize children. I mean, that's what I'm sort of, we've got, I think there's some like 9 characteristics, And actually, we'd agree with many of them, disability, various discriminatory categories. No one should be discriminated against because they've got a physical disability or something. But there seems to be this, we've seen it in a lot of our newspapers and, things that are happening. It's like they want to sexualize the 3-year-olds. It almost seems like that. I mean, it's sort of above anything else.
I agree. And I was at a school where it was Halloween. So they get all the children to dress up in Halloween costumes. And some of the older girls, and I say older girls, they were like 10 and 11, basically were dressed up as sexy cheerleaders. Now, I thought that was highly inappropriate. I mean, the parents obviously didn't because they were the ones who were doing the dressing up, but, nothing was said. It's a reflection of society, I suppose, as well. It clearly doesn't all stem in schools, really. But there is and I think you're right, Paul, there is a desire that children should know about these issues at an earlier and earlier age. Partly maybe because
as a teacher, wouldn't you say there's a safeguarding issue there? If you've got adult male, just for argument's sake, talking to 8-year-old girls about masturbation, I'm just talking about the whole barriers between, when we grew up, there were all these barriers, you don't talk about it, you don't talk to strangers about it, you don't tell them intimate details. I mean, isn't this a safeguarding issue as well?
Well, I mean, yes, to you and I, and safeguarding is, again, that's something they spend a huge amount of time teaching you about. But again, it's how you categorize safeguarding. So me being somebody who'd raised queries about talking to children about transgenderism, that is a safeguarding issue. But actually having a man in a dress coming and talking to primary school children, why does he want to go and talk to primary school children about these sort of things? There's no red flags at all. That's lovely and brilliant, and we should be proud of that. So there's a completely warped view of what safeguarding actually means. It is just crazy.
Yeah. And let me just were you alone in your critical thinking, or were there other students that sort of were questioning, critical, or expressing disapproval on the events?
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't alone, but I was probably alone as somebody who would say more than a few words about it. I think there was definitely a sort of climate of fear in that they knew that if they were too overt about it, that something could happen. I don't say anybody actually said that to me directly, but you'd have comments, or I'd make a comment and somebody would laugh or nod or sort of roll their eyes, type of thing. And you can tell whether somebody agrees with you or disagrees with you. If you make a comment and somebody sort of gives you the sort of dagger eyes, or is taking, you can tell whether they disagree. I never really got that at all. But I think they were better trained, or they trained themselves better to do it, and sort of imbibed that approach. I mean, again, I was different. I'm sort of self-made person. I've had my career. I wasn't depending on this to sort of fund my life or.
No, I mean, that's obviously a problem, isn't it? A lot of these people have got a job to hold down and a mortgage to pay, and were there any images at these shown at the event at all? Pictures, gingerbread man, I don't know, sexual images?
Not that I recall, not particularly. No, I don't really remember seeing those in particular. No.
And just a silly question: did anyone confront you at all? You're a heteronormative, disgusting man, or do you know your own gender or anything like that?
No, not really. I mean, it was all very professional in the way that they dealt with me. So I think partly at the back of, I suspect that they knew that they wanted to get rid of me, I also suspect that they perhaps wanted me to be the person who was resigning rather than them actually sacking me. There's also a financial implication for them as the course providers. I mean, I don't know exactly how they get paid, but obviously the more people they get through their course and to the end of it, the better, and they've got their statistics. They knew, I wasn't shy about my views. They didn't confront me directly. I think they did it quite cleverly, really.
And just before I conclude, I'm going to ask some terrible questions as a lawyer now. Just what you've said would be wonderful for media, wouldn't it? I mean, you can see this in the Daily Mail screaming at you. I'm just putting that thought into your mind because you've slightly gone quietly into the darkness, if I could put it that way. I mean, I just saw in this. I mean, this is great media. It's also, I mean, I'm just putting the thought in your mind, not leaving aside vast sums of money and blah, blah. It's the kind of case that would be the shock horror case that would sort of, I think you'd inevitably lose because the courts are going to say how wonderful all this sexual teaching of children is. But it's one of those kind of, you could be a real troublemaker. Have those thoughts, media or law, ever crossed your mind? Or is this really, I mean, we keep it anonymous as much as I just sort of just exploring that with you, where you're at.
I mean, I certainly have had people say that to me. I was talking to one of the priests that I know, and he said, yeah, I should take it to the newspapers. I mean, I suppose initially I was just very disappointed because I had sort of had my whole career future set out ahead of me. I'd be a teacher in Catholic schools for a few years. I was quite thinking I'd set up a small school myself. So yeah, it sort of dashed all my hopes there. I suppose by nature, I'm a slightly retiring sort of person. I don't necessarily want to be everywhere, but I also didn't want this issue to sort of go away. I mean, now that I'm more aware of it myself, everywhere you seem to look, there's stories of teachers in similar positions. So there was the chap in Ireland. There's been a number of people in the UK, a number of teachers that have resigned or been sacked. I think it was a lady teacher not recently again. So there's all, I initially thought that it was just me, but actually there's a whole swathe of these sort of events going on, which is why I think the SCITT committee the commission is doing a really good job, I think, of putting this together. I don't have an overwhelming desire to sort of go to the papers or law. I wouldn't be averse to doing it. I have no interest in money or fame or anything like that. The reason I'm here today really is that I think people should know what's going on, and if through that knowledge, something can be done about it.
Well, I certainly think, and I'm just sort of slightly talking, I mean, I'm certainly thinking, well, press is a very low threshold. I'm putting that thought into your mind. It's obviously up to you and whatever, but that's obviously something you can raise it media-wise and criticize. Conscience can't be teachers. They've got to make exemptions, that kind of stuff. I mean, obviously, litigation would just be a background probably to the media. But I mean, I don't know what the answer is, but I'm just trying to say, and I don't know whether we'd win it because they probably hate Christians so much nowadays in the public domain, but there is an element of sort of, you're going quietly a bit, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And maybe you ought to load up a double-barreled shotgun and shoot off a couple of barrels. I just
would want to do that. And it's not just a Christian thing. So, I mean, again, the relative that I mentioned with the child in the school, she's not a Christian at all. Well, she's nominally a Christian, but, she was outraged about, well, I mean, to be honest, everybody I've spoken has been absolutely outraged about what's actually happened to me and what is happening in school. So you've got lots of little pockets of individuals there. It's just that, somebody needs to pull it all together. And I'm happy to be a part of that. And, for like this SCITT organization, they're a private company. They're regulated obviously by, I guess, the Department of Education in terms of what they're teaching. So there's there is a possibility of exercising control over them, but they're just doing what they like. And all these charities that come in to teach to schools, they're just doing what they like.
No, I mean, I think that's what we get. We're getting highly sexualized children. Teachers are handing it over to Stonewall because that's, let's get it out of my hair. And Stonewall are in there with a sort of totally sexualized militant agenda. Just,
Yeah.
you know, yeah. Okay, sorry about all that. I totally digress. There may be some questions from the other commissioners.
Yes. I'd like to just pick up on some questions still with reference to the Diversity, Equity and Inclusion Day, James. Were all 55 students present as far as you're aware?
And probably the odd person was sick, but pretty much, yeah. I mean, we were all expected to go. It's one of those, it was flagged. It's, you know, this is an important day, you need to be there. Yeah.
There is a program concerning LGBT issues within the sphere of education. It's called No Outsiders. Did that program or the name of the program ever come up on that day, or for that matter, at any point during the course?
I don't think, I mean, I have heard of it, but I don't remember hearing about it during my teaching time, no.
Can we just go back a few steps? The Catholic school that you spent 6 months at, I think you may have said something about this. What was their sense of your achievement, or how you had graduated through that 6-month period before starting the teacher training course? What was their assessment of you?
I mean, I you know, not to blow my own trumpet, I think they thought and said that I would make a very good teacher. I think it was their assessment. I mean, I was only there 2 mornings a week, but you know, I went on various school trips with them. I got very involved with the children. You know, I built some good relationships up. When I left, they all, you know, made me presents and cards and things like that. I had a number of them, the teachers that I was with, say, "You would be a very good teacher." You know, I think they thought that, you know, for example, I bumped into one of the children down the road after I'd left school. I was actually at church. It was at church. This child was she was an altar server, and she'd been having some issues at school. So I just sent an email to the teacher. I mean, I'd left that school at that point, but you know, I think they felt that those sorts of issues and actually having genuine concern for children when you're not actually in the classroom was the sort of thing that made a good teacher. And they were happy to, they gave me a reference. You know, I was hoping I might even apply for a job there at some point as well.
And did that Catholic school get informed, as far as you're aware, about what's happened on the teacher training course?
I don't know if they were officially informed. I mean, when I did my application, again, they gave me a reference. I probably put down that I did work experience there. I did bump into I think it was the head or the deputy head. I'd certainly told people at that school, I'll give them a rough idea of what happened and why I wasn't doing it anymore. It was only a very quick conversation. They obviously commiserated with me, so they know. I haven't really had any further contact with them, but they're certainly aware of it, yeah.
But they were, you're saying that they were sympathetic to you?
Yeah, I mean, a bit. So the lady, so I spoke quickly to the head teacher, so I think she was just very surprised. It was just after mass, so people were sort of streaming through, so it was a very quick conversation. And then I had a chat with the school secretary, school secretary is obviously sort of probably number 2 generally in a lot of schools, really, and I had a longer chat with her. And yeah, I think she was quite shocked. I think probably she was expecting to see me back at some point in their school. I did toy with the idea of perhaps asking if I'd go and do some volunteering, but I was a bit fed up at that point, so I didn't.
If we can go back to the diversity event, did you make any notes during that event, or were any handouts provided?
Yes. Actually, sorry, there's one just other point I was going to say, going back to the Catholic school while I remember it. One point that was said to me constantly when I was doing my training is that you will be snapped up as a teacher, not necessarily because of anything that I'd done or demonstrated, just being a male primary school teacher. They're so thin on the ground that they're really in demand, and schools want them. So again, I think I could have added value there. Anyway, sorry, asking
was that said at the Catholic school or during the course?
Oh, loads of time. I mean, lots. I mean, probably most teachers I spoke to would say that. Not.
I mean, I'm aware. We're all aware that there's a shortage of males within the teaching profession. But in terms of that point that was communicated, do you think it was said at the primary school, or, as I say, during the course itself?
Both. I think
both. Right.
Lots of times I would have said that. Yeah.
Sure.
Do I have any material? We certainly. I probably. My habit was to take notes. As I recall, I don't think I took many notes, because when you think something's nonsense and ridiculous, you don't tend to write it down. You write down important things. There would have been some handouts. Whether I still have access to them, I don't know yet, because a lot of it was stored on like a central system.
You don't have any physical handouts in your possession? Printouts.
I'd have to have a look. I'm not sure. I might be able to find something.
If you do, the inquiry would be very interested to consider that as part of the overall evidence.
Yeah. So, okay. No, that's fine.
Certainly do send that in to us if you do manage to find that.
Yeah. Okay. No, that's fine.
We've spoken about transgender issues that was, they were featured in the event. What about other sexuality issues like lesbian, gay, bisexual, different genders, non-binary, different sexual orientations? Were all of those other matters also brought into the event, or was it just transgender?
Yeah, no, they were there. So they were all talked about. And again, it was very much this chap's hobby horse, transgenderism. But we talked about that. The standard phrases that you see, there's a range of genders, there's lots of genders, and we went through them quickly, which each one of them were. Again, no question of the fact that there might be disputes as to people's different views on these sorts of things, or even that this was a very new thing.
Did the speaker at the event say anything directed at the students, at you and the other students, that was inviting you to consider whether you were actually the gender that you thought you were, or maybe that you were born into the wrong body?
I don't think they would ask. I don't think they asked the specific questions for us, but it was the message was that these things were fluid, and that we needed to understand that. I mean, to be honest, he was a little bit of a narcissist. It was all about him, and his journey and how he felt, and that we should then take that and think about how children might feel. I don't think he asked us necessarily whether any of us might be transgender or anything.
No. And you said earlier, with reference to some of the other questions, that it wasn't so much about a debate. You were just told what you had to think, as it were. But were any questions invited from the students of any kind that maybe involved people questioning what was heard? Do you remember any critical questions, any questions that brought a different slant on the ethos of the event?
It was, I mean, we're always encouraged to ask questions and then go back into our groups and discuss these things. But the questions that were encouraged were ask questions so that you can better understand these issues, so that you can better understand how a transgender person thinks or is. Those are the sort of questions that were encouraged. I can't remember exact questions that were asked. Certainly nobody felt comfortable enough, and even I didn't feel comfortable enough in saying, well, could this be a mental health issue rather than an actual change of gender issue. I suspect he would have asked me to be removed from the lecture if I'd said that. He didn't threaten to do that, but it was there was sort of an undertone. There was a slightly aggressive undertone in this, and slightly defensive, I think, about these sorts of issues. So no, nobody really felt comfortable, I think, to do that.
And apart from the speaker speaking during that day, were there any exercises or team building work between the students, any interactions in small groups, that kind of thing?
There was
pairing up with another student and discussing what you heard. Anything along those lines?
Yeah, I mean, so that is the general approach that a lot of these lectures go on, which I think is very lazy, really, because you end up only lecturing half the time, and really you're getting people to talk about your subject for the other half of the time. And if we all have a chat about a subject that somebody else is talking to us about, we're not going to learn any more from talking to each other. But anyway, that's to the side. So yeah, I mean, there was lots of that. One, I remember we were basically told to go away and try and put some definitions to terms like transgender and bisexual. So we were supposed to work in groups to do it. I mean, my table, I think a lot of people didn't take it particularly seriously. There was you could certainly hear giggles coming from around the table, but when it came time to stand up and say things, it was textbook. Clearly everybody knew what we were supposed to say, and they all said it.
Right. Before we go on to the next,
could I ask a couple of questions?
Simon, do you have any questions?
Yeah, I do. Yeah. Could was marriage at any point, I'm talking about traditional marriage between a man and woman, raised at any point during this session, and also the benefits of marriage both to the spouses and to the children who grow up in the security of such relationships? And
no.
and what? Nothing.
No, I mean, so not on that particular day at all. No, we didn't talk about marriage that I remember at all, or any benefits of it. I certainly remember days when I was at school where they were talking about relationships, the different sorts of relationships that your parents might have, and there was certainly these are just the different types. You might have a man and a woman, you might have two men, you might have three women, and all those sorts of things, all put on a par. Clearly none is better than any others. They're just different, and that was at an actual school where I was sort of basically I was in the classroom. I wasn't clearly teaching that, but the teacher was teaching that.
How much liberty would you say a teacher in, any school, and also in religious schools as well, would have in advancing the Christian view that marriage is actually the superior form of relationship?
They wouldn't be able to say that at all. I mean,
even based on evidence, because there's lots and lots of evidence to show that.
No. So the way that subjects tend to work in primary schools is you'll have a subject lead. So you'll have a maths lead and an RE lead and things like that. So the lead designs the courses for the teachers, and the teachers work within that to their individual plans. So in other words, it's very difficult for you as a teacher to tweak a lesson in a way that you think is more appropriate, because it's going to be reviewed by lead teacher and then the head. But no, I mean, I would never think that any teacher would dare have that sort of view. I mean, they would probably say that would be the same as saying that a white person is better than a black person. Saying that a married couple has a better chance of bringing up children, rather than a child that has two married parents will have a better chance than have unmarried.
So that wouldn't be tolerated, but the premature sexualization and de facto grooming of young children is tolerated.
More than tolerated. It's so
advanced.
It's advanced, yeah. So I mean, I think, we never got to that sort of stage, but you get the feel of these things. If I'd stood up and said, well, actually, and there's examples, isn't there, in that's happened. Yeah, I don't think anybody would dare to say that. That would certainly have felt a sort of very pale male thing to say, and you certainly would have got lots of looks. You would have got lots of looks for the other students, because they would have just been, I think, shocked that anybody would actually say that, whether or not they agreed with it or not.
Okay, whether or not it's true. And so, exactly. I mean, does the prospect of grooming worry you? I mean, the reason I ask is that you see, for example, in what's happened in a lot of northern towns where young girls have been prematurely sexualized. They very often come from broken families, and then they're exploited. But they're only exploited because they've been sexualized first, and because they've been given access to all kinds of contraception, and then they're exploited by gangs of organized men. I mean, do you think that the way the sexual ideology is being advanced in classrooms makes this sort of scenario more likely?
I think if I was a potential groomer or predator, I would be delighted by the way that somebody is doing my work for me in getting children to think about these issues at an early sort of stage, and confusing children, and leaving children in a position where they don't know clearly what is right and wrong. And I think also leading children to doubt the advice and the guidance that they get from their parents. If children, and I've seen this in my children in the past, not so much on sexual issues, but children will come home and say, Mr. So-and-so says that abortion is a good thing, or that marriage is not important. Those sort of issues, and then you're setting up a dichotomy, because good parents will say to their children, "You must trust your teacher," and now we're thinking, well, but not that particular point, not that particular point. So it breaks down that level of trust. Children are then confused. They're looking for certainty, and you're right, Simon. It opens the door for these sorts of people to get in.
Okay, thank you very much.
Could we, unless there's any further points on that, could we move on, please, to the next set of events? James, I'd like to discuss the event when you spoke with other students as you were walking back to your cars, as you say in your case summary. So this is a week after the event, the Diversity Day. You entered into what you say was a private conversation with your fellow students.
No, I think it was on the same day, Robert. I think it was on
on the same day?
Yeah.
Oh,
I think so, yeah.
On the same day, okay. And you're walking back to your cars, and you told us that you, quote here, you made a comment to the effect that I thought the whole transgender thing was nonsense. Can you try recalling the language that you used then? Was that the language more or less, or was it slightly?
Yeah, I mean, we're just talking about the day, as you have a debrief as to what you've been doing during the day. Typically, if we'd had a math session, it would have been, well, that was really useful, or that was hard, or I can see how I would use that particular skill. I think the general feeling was that this day was a complete waste of time. It was jokey, I think, in the sense that I thought that was a load of nonsense. I didn't think that anybody necessarily disagreed with me. It was probably a bit of nodding and things like that.
How many people were privy to your words, would you say?
There's probably 3 or 4 of us, I think, walking back to the cars.
And were these people that you had previously perhaps expressed similar thoughts to?
Yeah, they were probably people I knew, reasonably well. Yep.
Right. And it was one of those people, I understand, from the information you've given us, who made the complaint against you.
Well, I don't know who it was. I can only assume it must have been one of those people, because when I got to the meeting with the directors, the word nonsense was used, and I recall saying that to those people. I guess I probably said nonsense a few times, so I think it was one of those people, but I don't know who.
Yes, and I think you've already indicated this elsewhere. The general sense that you had from all the students, I mean, you never got the sense that anyone opposed what you said. Not that you, I mean, I get the sense that you would have expressed your views to some of the students, but not all 55. But you never got the sense that anyone opposed what you said.
No, I mean, we
spoke
were
privately.
Yeah, so we were mainly split into 2 groups. So there's probably about half of them I knew much better than the other half. The other half we only saw occasionally on sort of big days like this Diversity Day. And I knew most of them by name, and some of them much better. We'd occasionally sort of walk and have a bite of lunch, or we'd sit down and have lunch together. They certainly knew what I sort of thought on these things. They knew that I was Christian. They were all generally lovely people. They're very kind and helpful. When you're sort of in that sort of environment, you've all got to help each other, really, because it's tough and it can get quite intense. So they were very nice people. They're very considerate. I think you've got to have that attitude if you're a teacher. And they knew what I thought. Nobody gave me the cold shoulder at any particular point.
These 3 people, there were 3 people.
3 or 4, yeah.
Back to the car with. Did these people know, as far as you're aware, that you're Christian?
Yeah, I mean, I think probably everybody probably did. And I didn't stand up at some point and go, well, I'm a Christian.
But they happened to know it during the course
it was just sort of
previous conversations.
We were sort of 4 or 5 months into the course now. And again, when I had to nip off for a slightly longer lunch break because it was a holy day of obligation, I remember coming back and somebody goes, oh, where have you been? I said, I've just been to maths. I said, maths? No, I said maths. So, it sort of was in the air that they knew that I was Christian. I guess some of them probably thought it was a bit odd. There was certainly one lady there who she was Christian, not Catholic, so I'd had a few conversations with her about it.
Which day was this when you said that you'd been to mass? Was that the day after the event?
Oh no, that was probably a month or so before.
Right.
It was probably, I don't know if it was like Feast of the Assumption or something like that. So it was probably around sort of about this time last year, something like that.
And these three people, was there any indication to suggest that one or more of them may have been LGBT?
No, I mean, as far as I knew, I didn't think anybody on the course was. Not that I mind, but I don't think they were particularly. No.
No. Okay.
Sorry. Again, there was one girl who, on the course, I do remember having a conversation about marriage with, and thinking about it now, and I did tell her my view on marriage, and I think she was a little bit taken aback. Whether she was one of the 3 or 4 people, I can't remember exactly, but yeah. Anyway, sorry.
Okay. Simon, you had a question.
No, I was thinking. Sorry to interrupt you. I shouldn't have done that. I was just thinking, if it was about this time last year, it probably would have been All Saints. Was that right? All Saints.
Yeah,
All Saints.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry about that.
Right. Now, after this interaction, as you were all walking to the car, as you say, a complaint was made. You don't know who made the complaint, and then there was a response that you had from the course director with a follow-up meeting. And so I believe, Simon, you have a number of questions in that area for us.
Yeah. Okay, so the following week, you received an email from the course director asking you to attend the meeting at their offices. What was said in this email, and do you still have the email?
Well, I'm not sure whether I have it. I can have a look. We had our own email account, which I probably don't have access to, but I'll have a look. So what was said? It was a very short email. It was, please, can you come in? But we'd like to talk to you. Can you come in to the head office, which was based at one of the schools, for a chat? I think I did reply, actually. Well, I did reply, but I said something along the lines, yeah, no, that's fine. Could you just tell me what you want to talk about? Because obviously it's a little bit, well, it was very odd, really, to have to do this. And I don't like going into a meeting not knowing what I'm talking about. I like to sort of be able to prepare, as I sort of did for today. So I just said, okay, what's it about? I'll have to see if I've still got the email. Or something along the lines of it refers to the Diversity Equity Day. They may have said somebody has made a comment about it, something like that. So that did give me a little bit of a clue what was going to happen.
Okay. You tell us that the meeting was held the day following the email. It was held at the offices of the teacher training provider. Who was present at this meeting? So
there's 2 directors of the course. They were both present. There's sort of the senior director as a lady, and then there was a chap who's, I suppose he's sort of like the, so she's more like the chairman, he's more like the CEO. He's more the sort of hands-on, does a lot of the training himself and sort of the organisation. She's more of a overseas sort of thing. So it was the 2 most senior people on the training course that they had. Yeah.
And they interviewed you jointly, did they?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it was about that. It was quite a long chat. Yeah.
How long did it go on for?
Somewhere between an hour and a half and 2 hours. It's something like that.
Okay, so it's a man and a woman, and it went on for about an hour and a half to 2 hours.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, was there anything? I mean, it might sound like an unusual question, but was either of these people, did they come across to you as that they might have a reason for adopting that particular ideological agenda? Was either of them transsexual, for example, or obviously
neither? Was clearly gay.
But beg your pardon, I missed that. The screen froze.
Sorry. So neither of them was transgender, but
yeah,
one of them was definitely gay. Yeah.
Who was that? The man or the woman?
The man. Yeah.
Right. Okay. And what made you think that? Okay. You don't have to ask. You feel a bit hideous, that question.
Yeah.
Okay. So what exactly was said? I mean, obviously it was going on for two hours. You can't tell me everything. But what was there anything in that conversation that jumped out at you as being a little bit odd, a little bit out of the ordinary, something that jarred? I mean, is this, and do you have any distinctive recollections that you wish to share?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose my first sort of thoughts was this is way out of proportion to what's actually happened. You know, if I'd stood up during the course and gone on some sort of rant about something, then maybe I might have understood it. But I thought it was way out of proportion. I think I was very surprised by how they were treating it and how seriously they were treating it. You know, it was obviously not something that could wait a couple of weeks until we were all back in the training centre. They felt they had to address it there and then. I mean, it was clearly something that was pretty much the worst offence, other than actually, well, there's not many more worse offences that I think a teacher could have done in their eyes. Clearly, this is something that this was something that they felt that had to be sorted out. You know, I basically, this was the wrong attitude. And, you know, I think, to be fair to them, they were trying to help me. They were trying to help me in the sense of they wanted me to change what I'd said, but they also wanted me to get through the course. And they knew that on the criteria that was there, that they set to a certain degree, that they wouldn't be able to get me through the course with my current view. So they wanted to get me through the course. And this was a massive stumbling block in their view. So they were trying to come up with ways they're trying to understand to explore my understanding of this view. So I spent a lot of time saying, it was in theoreticals, you know, if we had this child in my class that was transgender, and, you know, they wanted me to say that I would go along with it. So I said, well, that's against my beliefs. But of course, what about the child's beliefs was their view, or the child's parents' beliefs? Well, I said, well, it's not quite the same. It's not, and they compared it to sort of, you know, would I disrespect a Muslim for their beliefs? Would I say that, you know, Ramadan was a load of nonsense or something? So, well, clearly I wouldn't do that. But me accepting a Muslim person's beliefs doesn't harm that Muslim child, in a classroom environment. Whereas actually me going along with a boy who's pretending he's a girl could well have some serious long-term damage to that child. And I'm not going to be the person that goes along with that and is partially responsible for the horrendous things that could happen. They were desperate, really, I think, to try and find a workaround. So they were saying, well, look, we'll get a Catholic head teacher, and you can go and talk to them and see how they deal with these issues. So basically, they would try and find a friendly Catholic head teacher who would try and persuade me why I misunderstood this issue. So I think, yeah, that's what I take away from it. They wanted to solve. They saw this as a problem. I was a problem, and they wanted to sort the problem out and make me think the right things.
Okay, so the conversation was kind of set within the premises of what might happen in the classroom. A very, very pragmatic approach to teaching. Yeah. But was anything said specifically about your faith? I mean, were you asked to give an explanation of your faith, or what? Or did your faith come up in the context of being part of the problem?
In a sense. So I said, well, I was trying to explain why I had these views, and I said, well, it's not just about me being a Christian, because there are plenty of non-Christian people who also don't agree with the transgender sort of ideology. But actually, it is part of why I believe that God made man and woman. And, so I then sort of played the sort of, well, this is a protected characteristic, isn't it? These are my beliefs. And but again, they probably didn't say it quite so openly, but that's not as important as the beliefs of this child not to be upset. And we've got to respect his beliefs and not my beliefs. My beliefs really goes back to the point about conscience. It's really irrelevant, to be honest. I can have my beliefs as long as they don't interfere with anybody else's beliefs or their beliefs, I think. Okay.
And did they put any labels on your beliefs? Did they accuse you of transphobia or anything like that?
They didn't, no. I think it was quite a tense meeting in the sense that it wasn't a relaxed conversation. I think they were very careful. They'd obviously planned what they were going to say to me. I think they were careful not to say things like that. I think they wanted to sort of direct the conversation like that. They didn't want to get into a big argument with me. So no, they didn't make those sort of allegations.
They were trying to save your career really by helping you to believe the right things. Is that right?
I think that was part of it. Yeah, I mean, they were clearly looking out for themselves, and they were trying to help me, and I thank them for that. But you can't help somebody in that way. It doesn't work. They didn't value it at all. I remember saying to them, I said, look, do you think that in this hypothetical situation, that this boy is actually a girl? Do you think that? And they said, well, it doesn't matter what we think. That's not important. They didn't want to get drawn into sort of a conversation that involved their views. But also, again, it doesn't matter what you think really about these things. This is just how it is. That's how they saw teachers, put them into a box.
I mean, did any of the, I mean, forgive me my ignorance, but I wasn't quite sure that teachers were actually obliged by law to believe these things. I mean, did the question of the law come up in this conversation? I mean, I still think that is the case.
Yeah. No, I don't think we talked about the law, but to be a qualified teacher, you've got to get a qualified teacher certificate, I think it's called. So you've got to pass the course and they give you a certificate. As part of getting that certificate, you have to pass a series of professional and ethical standards. So it's part of the law in the sense that they've imported that into those professional legal standards. And therefore, without passing those standards, you can't be a teacher.
Yeah. So you're screened out before you even get to the chalk face.
Yeah. And it's a sneaky way of doing it, because obviously changing the law would be difficult, but changing those sorts of things. And there was no doubt about it. They said to me, if you were a teacher now and you'd said to a child, oh, that's a load of nonsense, you'd be suspended. You'd be probably looking for you wouldn't be looking for a new job because you wouldn't be getting a new job, but you certainly wouldn't have the existing job that you had. Yeah. And I think they were trying to scare me. They were trying to scare me at that point to say that you've got to just recant your views. And I said, well, I can't do it.
Well, that's wonderful. If Robert wants to invite others for questions.
Thank you, Simon. I'd just like to pick up on a few things, if I may. How did you actually, in your own words, how did you feel during this meeting with the course director?
But I suppose nobody likes to be in those sort of environments where they're being sort of challenged quite firmly on their view. So, I suppose I was nervous. My heart was beating quite a little bit. I was trying to think through the implications of what was happening to me. I was a little bit in shock and surprised that I was having to have this conversation. And, it's running through your head, well, does this mean I can't be a teacher anymore? So yeah, it was a difficult conversation. You're having to think on your feet, and it wasn't. They weren't unpleasant, but it's not something sort of conversation you'd want to be in often.
And you haven't said that that any fellow student or friend or anyone else as a support sat with you in that meeting. When you got that email calling you to a meeting, was there anything said about your right to have someone present with you as a support?
I don't think they did offer me that. No. It never occurred to me to bring somebody.
And at any stage, was there any mention of who, I suspect the answer is no here, but who actually made the accusation against you?
No, I didn't ask because I knew they wouldn't tell me. And to be honest, I'm not sure I necessarily wanted to know really, because I suppose I was a bit worried that it'd be somebody that I'd got quite friendly with, and that would be obviously very disappointing. But they didn't offer to tell me. They wouldn't have told me, no.
And during the actual meeting with the course director, were there ever any mentions of things like hate crime, bigotry, transphobia? Did those words come up with reference to you specifically?
I don't think they did use those words, no. I think they sort of felt that they were treading on eggshells a little bit. So they were quite delicate in the way that they put it to me. They weren't accusing me of anything in particular. They were just saying this is a totally unacceptable view, and you won't. So they were coming from the attitude or the position of this will stop you being a teacher. This will stop you being qualifying as a teacher, rather than these are horrible things that you're actually saying. I think that was the underlying phrase, and I suspect one or two of them may have thought those things, but they didn't say it explicitly to me.
Now, you were expected to give a firm undertaking. Simon, you want to ask James some questions about this area?
Yes, certainly. You were told that you had to give a firm undertaking. Can you say what it was that was said?
Yeah, so this was sort of the section where they were sort of exploring how we might resolve this. So, you know, how we might get to a position where I might be able to carry on and pass the course. We didn't go into it in a huge amount of detail because I did make it clear to them that I wasn't prepared to give them any sort of undertaking or say anything to them. But I don't think they would necessarily, they wouldn't have accepted me just saying, look, sorry, I won't say that again. You know, they certainly treated it far more seriously than that. So I think they certainly got a black mark down against my name. So we didn't get into the detail, but my sort of impression was that there'd have to, and they didn't say this, so, you know, I am surmising here now, that there maybe have to be something in writing. I would have to certainly tell them. So, well, at the end of the course, we would have had various sort of interviews with our mentors. So what I think they would have done is they would have made that a very key part of that interview that I would have had with my final mentor. They may or may not have wanted me to put something in writing, but you can bet that I would have been quizzed on that particular point very, very hard so that they could have signed me off. So I suspect that's probably how they would have done it. So they would have interviewed me. I didn't get to that stage, so I don't know how it works really, but I think they would have put some written report together. I suspect we all would have had to sign it. You know, James is good at this. He's got weaknesses in here. He's aware that this issue in terms of transgender children is something that he's perhaps made mistakes on in the past and is now has now realised those mistakes. That's, I think, the approach they would have taken, but I don't know exactly because we didn't get.
Okay, so in effect, you said you were forced to resign because you wouldn't go along with their trans agenda, and the outcome of this is that you've not been able to qualify as a teacher. In your own words, can you tell us how this has made you feel?
I have come to terms with it more now. Yeah, it was quite devastating at the time. You know, I'd spent a year or more before starting the course, you know, thinking about it and volunteering, and you know, it being the next part of my career. You know, it's something. You know, it's not something I was doing for the money, you know, or anything like that. It's something that I thought I could be quite good at. So yes, it did shake me. It did shake my. I've always worked for myself, so I have had a slightly insular view on the world. You read the news, but you sort of look at these things and go, well, that's just ridiculous, isn't it? It doesn't actually happen. And I think when it actually happens to you, and you realise that actually there are forces out there that you might think are daft, but actually are very, very powerful and will derail you and will channel you out of certain things. It's quite scary. It's not scary for me. I mean, I will be fine. It's scary for the children that will be at schools, that will be taught. It's scary for, you know, future trainee teachers. I mean, I can imagine, for one thing, that they will learn a lesson from this in the sense, so the course directors, that they will make it much more, they'll be much more on guard for this sort of thing in the future, I think, and watching out for people like me and making, or perhaps trying to test people to see what their views are at an earlier stage. Because they don't really want to fail people during the course. They want people to either not start or get rid of them early, because they've got their stats to think about. So there's that. And I think my children are grown up now, but you know, I will have grandchildren hopefully at some point. It makes me very nervous about sending my grandchildren to school. I don't know what they're going to be taught. You know, I have relatives that have got children. We mentioned this before. They've had people coming into their schools that they've not been told about, that are teaching things. Actually, what I won't mention the name of this transgender activist that came in, because it's a very provocative name to teach sort of 8 and 9-year-olds. And they were alone with this class of 8 or 9-year-olds with only a teaching assistant. So the actual teacher had left, probably to go and do some paperwork, because teachers have got lots of paperwork. But it's very much going back to the grooming point. If I was going to, well, I won't put it that way, but you start with the easy stuff. So they start talking about smoking, how smoking is bad. You build up confidence with children. The next lesson is talking about puberty, something like that. And it just beggars belief that they don't tell the parents. Don't know. Some don't care, but parents don't know what's going on in these things, and that's the thing that worries me.
So there's you're also scared. You're also fearful about parents' rights.
Yeah, I don't think parents have the rights that they perhaps think that they actually have. Parents don't get any say over what their children are taught in terms of these things like that. If you said to the teacher, I want my child to sit out for these sorts of classes, I don't think they can anymore. Right. Teachers will just do it. It's much easier for teachers just to get on and do stuff.
But I think legally, I mean, Paul might have a view on this, is that the schools should teach in loco parentis in place of the parents, not substitute the parents and the rights. And I think that's still a principle in law.
No, it isn't actually. I mean, I think one of the things that come across is the absolute vitiation of sort of religious values, and it's interesting they're even overriding Muslim values. But the actual it depends on the country. I think in Britain, United Kingdom, you can avoid direct sex education till you're 11, but then it's mandatory after 11. That at least is a sensible provision. The Welsh government introduced it at age 3. And the choice for parents this is how the courts have applied it, just for a matter of interest. Parents are free to choose homeschooling. Parents are free to send their child to a private school, religious or otherwise, that may accommodate their views. But should parents, and this is a bit of a play on words, choose to send their child to a state school, they must accept the curriculum given to them, no matter what it is. There are some political safeguards, but sex isn't deemed political, or sexuality education, as it's known, isn't deemed political. Global warming isn't deemed political. Feminism isn't deemed political. So the schools are very much taking advantage of it. So I think, James, if you'd actually taught in England, you would have had some scope up to 11, but I think these areas are very now blurred. They call it relationship education. They're trying to distinguish it. Nobody knows whether they just renamed it or whether it does mean a difference. So it's a bit.
Could I ask that we go back to James's case? Is that right? Because it's going off the topic somewhat.
Okay, just a couple of other questions. Did you at any point seek legal advice?
No, I haven't.
Okay, and I mean, but you've told me that you're already you already told us that you're already financially secure, and that this you didn't need this job as such. But what impact, other impacts have there been any impacts upon you as a result of having to leave this course halfway through? How has it affected you?
I mean, I suppose to some extent it's embarrassing in the sense that it feels a little bit like a failure. And yes, you can explain to people the circumstances, but some people will understand those, and I have told lots of people, and they're outraged and behind me. Some are not so interested, and I don't feel like I want to be having that conversation again and again with people. It's like, oh, what happened with your teaching career, James? Because it's a big thing to talk about.
How old are you? Don't mind me asking.
Yeah, no, I'm 46.
Okay, so has this affected your career path as such?
Well, so I've been in my career path quite a long time, and I was looking for a change of career. So it's affecting my teaching career path. not lost. I think that's a slight exaggeration, really. But I did have when you've got the next 10 years planned out as to what you're actually going to do, and then that's suddenly whipped away from you. So, certainly to some degree, I've been searching around for what I'm going to do now. I still think maybe at some point I would like to get back into teaching. I think I'm very good with kids. I think I always have a good relationship with kids, and so I'd like to do that. But yeah, it certainly took me back, and I'm having to sort of rethink what I do now. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I have no further questions. Thank you very much indeed, James.
Thank you.
Thank you, Simon. I have just a few closing questions, James, if I may. You mentioned the person with a provocative name. We're not going to mention what the name is, as you rightly say. Is this the course director at the meeting, or the transgender activist who gave a talk at the diversity?
No, this is unconnected with my course. This is a relative of mine who had a transgender person in to teach their children about.
I see. Right. So it's a different case. Okay, that's fine. Can you just tell us the placement school that was being lined up? What was the ethos of that school? Was it Catholic or some other ethos?
Well, I did two. So I did my first placement school, which was, well, they were both. So and then I did another one that I was only there for less than a week. I mean, I think they were probably both nominally sort of Church of England. So neither of them were Catholic. I had actually asked for a Catholic school, but I hadn't been given one. You wouldn't have known from going into either of those schools that there was any religious ethos at all.
There were two schools, two placements, you're saying?
Well, you do 3 over the year, but did all of my first one. I only did less than a week in my second one,
right. And
the third one I obviously never got to.
And are you aware of any feedback or comments about you on those two placements?
Well, I mean, we had
that were communicated either to you or to the course training, the teacher training people.
About this particular issue, or just generally about my?
Just generally.
Yeah.
Feedback generally.
I mean, I suppose the second one I wasn't really there long enough to get much feedback. The first one, I think I'd done very well. I think I got some quite positive feedback. I mean, it's very much let's talk about things you've got to work on. And, one of the things I struggled with was class management. So my first placement, I had year 1. So they were basically 5 and 6 years old. And getting them to sit still for a long period of time was difficult, and, is a real skill, which I hadn't mastered at all. So yeah, I certainly had sort of work-ons, if you like, for those sorts of things. But I mean, I think they would say I'd built up a really good rapport with the children. I was really sad to go. That's the life of a teacher, I suppose. You move around and leave the children, but I was really sad to leave them. There was a few tears from the kids and me on my last day on that, and I'd only been there sort of 8 weeks really. But I think I'd done well. I think, when you're a trainee teacher, you obviously want to make a good impression on these placements, because quite often they're where you'll get a job offer from. Yes. So I wouldn't have been surprised if I'd applied there if there had been a job. I'm sure they would have had me back. I mean, they were a nice school, and I think they did well.
Yes, thank you. We've covered a lot of ground with many questions this morning. Are there any other thoughts, James? Any other things that you maybe think you haven't said, or we haven't asked you about? Anything else that you would like to add?
Not particularly. No, I think you've asked all the sort of questions that I could talk about. I mean, I think the general summary for me is that I was shocked by the way that the course is, and teaching as well, is so permeated with this sort of ideology, and it's not questioned, as we've talked about, and they want teachers that fit that ideology. I mean, I did say, well, again, I don't mean to blow my own trumpet, but academically, I was definitely at the top of the class in terms of the trainees. Not to, be mean about the trainees, because they were lots of intelligent people, but I was helping them with maths and things like that. To be honest, if I was running a teacher training course, I'd be exactly the sort of person I would want to teach maths to children, and I know stuff. I've been around. I know a lot about history. I've got a degree in geography. I've run my own business. Now I've got a lot of experience. I think I would, not just me, but the person that has those sorts of knowledge and experience, I think would make a tremendous asset to any school. But it just wasn't. They weren't really interested, to be honest. And not that I didn't want special treatment, obviously, really. But you would have thought, right, we need this guy as a teacher because he will be a good teacher. And there's a shortage of good teachers, the shortage of any teachers. But they didn't care. And I suppose that was a little bit disheartening. It's like, well, you don't really care about, it was a numbers game, I suppose. They want to chuck loads of teachers through. They don't really care what their skills are, and hope some of them stay around for a long enough period of time and get out the difficult ones. But I just felt, I didn't feel valued particularly, and nobody sort of fought for me, and nobody thought, right, well, does James have a point? Because clearly James didn't have a point about anything.
I just have one final question. When you handed in your resignation, I don't know if you covered this. What was the response exactly?
Yeah. Well, yeah. So I think I said that they told me I couldn't go back to the school because I'd be a safeguarding risk, which
That's
really
right. Yeah.
outraged me. But anyway, putting that aside, I went away and thought about it for a day or two, and then I sent a formal email resignation, sending out the reasons that I didn't feel I'd be able to act as a teacher. The response I got was, that was it. I think they were expecting me to resign. There was no question of, can we do anything further for you? Can we address any of those points? It then moves on to practicalities. And the next stages, I think they were probably relieved that I'd actually handed my notice in. It's like, good, he's gone. We've dealt with a problem.
So they weren't sorry to see you go in any sense?
No. I mean, there may have been a sort of all the best for the future, but that was a sort of standard throwaway line, I think, if anything. It was very. I suspect they heaved a sigh of relief. Really, I think that's what they were edging me into, really, when they knew that I wasn't going to play ball with them. They were, especially they were both very good lecturers. I did learn a lot from them in terms of their particular subjects. And how to teach. And I think if they hadn't sort of soaked up all this ideology, I think they are good trainers, and the course would have been a good course. It just needs that layer taking off of it. Teachers don't need to get involved in this. Kids don't need to get involved in this, and it certainly shouldn't be the driving force of teacher training.
Sorry, this is one other question that comes to mind. This question of a reference. I know this wasn't a job, it was a training course, but still, was there an expectation under normal circumstances that you would get a reference at the end of that course? Should that be required further down the line? Yeah,
they give you the certificate, the qualified teacher status certificate. And so I don't know if they give you a formal reference there. I think that's just it. I mean, I didn't get to that sort of stage in the process of applying for jobs, really. I don't know. I don't know the answer.
No, that's absolutely fine. Thank you. Paul or Simon, are there any closing questions that we might have for James?
I'm okay. I think I'm fine.
No, thank you.
That's everything. Thanks.
That's okay. Okay. Right. Well, we don't have any further questions for you, James. Thank you